Hello and welcome to CinemaSlice Education. We're doing the first video today in part of a series of educational videos where we're looking at some of the qualifications you can get in film studies in the UK. We're going to start with the History of Film section from the Eduqas GCSE. So if you have a look up on the screen at the moment, you can see it's the Eduqas Film Studies GCSE we're doing. It's part of Component 1, Paper 1, as we would call it, Section B, and it's a really tiny part of the paper. It's only worth 5 marks, but it is mandatory and it's better to have those 5 marks than not have them. The list of historical events is only 10 points long and it focuses on developments in film and film technology. So for today's lesson, although there are 10 points of information, we're just going to be doing the first 3. There's the 10 points up on the left hand side of the screen at the moment, so you can pause this screen if you want to and have a look at them. We're going to be looking, like I said, just at the first 3 of those points, and this really covers the birth of cinema and primarily the silent era. 1927 is when the silent era kind of ends with the arrival of the jazz singer, but we're going to get onto that next time. Today we're going to take some notes and I'm going to try and cover all of the questions that people usually ask me when I teach lessons on this particular topic. So what do you need to hand? You've got to have some notepaper or an exercise book. You need a place to watch this video and you need a place where you can write some notes at the same time. A separate piece of paper will come in really handy for the little quiz that we've got at the end of the video. So starting off, please write at the top of your piece of notepaper Film History Part 1 and we'll get started. The first point on the timeline of film history is 1895 and the Lumiere Brothers. These were the 2 French brothers, Auguste and Louis, who are widely credited with having projected a film onto a wall, a sheet of paper or a screen for the first time for an audience. Now, I've put some bullet points there. I'm just going to talk through those. The first one is that there's some controversy around that, and there are other people who can lay a claim to having shown a film before. Thomas Edison, quite famously, had a machine which he could show a film, but he could only show it to one person at a time. So really, we're going with the widely accepted idea that the Lumiere brothers, and as far as the exam's concerned, you want to stick with exactly what the exam board's put together. You don't want to do anything different. You don't want to go off and say, oh, Thomas Edison was able... No, don't do that. As far as we're concerned, the Lumiere brothers were the first people to project a film. It was incredibly popular back in 1895 and audiences went kind of wild for it. There's some disagreement on when the dates were, when these were first shown and audiences first got to see them. I think December in 1895, and the Lumiere brothers carried on making films for about 5 to 10 years afterwards. There were some limitations, as we're going to see when we have a look at one of their films. So the first film we're going to have a look at is just a really short clip of the arrival at a train at Le Ciotat station. I have no idea if I've pronounced that properly because I'm terrible at foreign languages. So I'm going to put this clip on now for us to have a look at. And here we are. This is a silent film, but as you can hear, there's some music playing over the background. I'm just going to turn that music down for a second and talk over what's happening here. What you notice is we've got a static camera, the film quality is pretty poor, and all that's happening at the moment is a train is pulling into a station and some people are getting off and some other people are getting on. And that's it, really. Although legend has it that when people first saw this, they ran in fear and shock from the sight of the train coming towards them because they'd never seen anything projected onto a screen before, as amazing as that might seem. And that's the arrival of a train at La Ciotat. Not very long, only about 50 seconds. Whenever I teach these lessons, I get a load of questions asked about some of the films, especially the ones from the very, very distant past. And so I put down some of the most frequently asked questions that I get. And one of them is, why doesn't the camera move? Why doesn't it move at all? I put all the answers up on this PowerPoint, so Why doesn't the camera move? Well, it was pretty heavy and it was really, really delicate at the time. And the answer to the second question, why do the people move in a funny way, helps answer the first two. They used a hand crank to push the film through. They used about 17 meters of film to record 50 seconds of footage. So if you imagine someone stood there cranking that film through by hand, winding it with a winch, and you couldn't really move around very far with it, and you had to look after the film quite carefully too. You didn't want to overexpose it, so it was very difficult to move the camera around. It's so short because, like I said, it was 17 meters just to do 50 seconds, and there wasn't much else to film. The train was going to leave the station. I don't know what else you would expect. Did people pay to watch such a short film? Yes, they did, and they would have loved it as well, because you've got to remember, they'd never seen anything else like this before. No one had watched any films. The closest thing they might have seen is Edison's kinetoscope, and that's around about it. Did people really run out of the screening? I have looked and looked and looked, and apparently this is true, and it's gone down in legend, and this is about films, and films are all about legends rather than 100% truth, so let's go with it. Apparently they did. So on your book or on your note paper, the first notes that you need to make then are number 1 in the margin. It was 1895, the Lumiere Brothers, first moving images projected for an audience. These are the key things that you need to get down. So if you want to take a pause here on the video and just make sure you've got those written down, then we can move on to the second. So our second point on the timeline is silent cinema, and it's not a single point on a timeline. It's actually a stretch of 30 odd years between 1895 and 1927, and this is where cinema kind of grew and developed, and it learned a language, a little bit like a baby growing up. It learns a language, it learns how to talk to people, how to talk to audiences, and how to get across ideas towards them. That's a picture of Buster Keaton on the left, and I'll get to him in just a second. But if you look at that big piece of writing that I've got on there, and I try to avoid using big pieces of writing, but it says that we learn in this period, people learn how to use camera shots and angles to suggest things about characters. They manipulated the lighting, they edited so things made sense, and they used mise-en-scène, which is a term that means all of the props and all of the hair and the makeup, anything you see on screen is contained in the mise-en-scène. And they also figured out location shooting, which is where you could take a camera out to some random location and shoot, as well as just doing it in a studio. So these all became accepted ways of creating much better films that entertain people. We're going to take a look at Buster Keaton because he, for me, is the master of silent film comedy. And his films are consistently entertaining. I had loads of success when I show these at A-level because it was one of the options for silent film at A-level. When people watch Buster Keaton, they think they don't like silent film, they think they don't like black and white films, they think they're not entertaining, and when they watch a Buster Keaton film, they change their mind really quickly. And one of the reasons why is that Buster Keaton did all of his stunts. He is an amazing human being. So we're going to watch a little clip, about 1 or 2 minutes, from his film 1 Week. There's a picture of this on the left hand side just to give you a little bit of context. Buster and his newlywed wife, they go and try and build a house, and it goes all wrong, and he builds it in the wrong place, and at the end of the film he decides he's going to move it in his car to a new location. So I've got the sound off on this particular film at the moment. 1 Week really does take place over the course of 1 week, and they just change the date. And here's Buster in his car and his wife, and here's a YouTube advert. That's really irritating. So here's Buster in his car with his wife, trying to make sure that the house that they're trying to move, they're using barrels to move it along, and they're trying to get it across to the other part of town where it's supposed to be. It is not particularly well built. Someone sabotaged the instructions to try and ruin Buster's wedding and his new marriage. And here's where we see some of the editing that they used. They got close-ups of detail and went back to long shots afterwards to show an element of continuity to what was happening and draw the audience's attention to things. Remember when I said that Buster Keaton did all of his own stunts as well? This car was designed to comically fall apart when required. I like the fact that his wife is always telling him to get on with it. Anyway, you'll notice that the house is currently across some train tracks. I'm sure they're going to come in to be part of the story very shortly. Oh dear. And what you get a sense of right now is that there's a complicated setup of action that's happening, multiple different camera angles, totally unlike the first film we watched on the timeline. We get a shot of a train, and we immediately, and a close-up of the whistle going, so we know that they can hear it. Because this is silent cinema, you needed to make it really obvious when someone could hear something. So a lot of clever ideas going on, and here's a really long shot. You can see the train in the background, and the couple trying to move it. I'm going to shut up for a second so you can watch this. And brilliantly, there's even a little camera move. They started to move cameras just a little bit. It was still really difficult. The cameras were still really big, still really bulky, but they were able to get some small camera moves in, especially if it was really, really important. Anyway, I'm sure everything... Oh, remember what I said about real stunts? Yeah, they genuinely drove a train through a house. Excellent work, Buster. Well done. So, moving on. Questions I usually get asked about Buster Keaton and silent cinema. If there is music playing, why is it called silent cinema? Well, at the time, there would be someone playing an organ or a piano at the screening, and that would happen in every single cinema. The theatre owner would pay someone to play an organ or a piano along. A lot of the time, they just made up the music on the spot. Occasionally, for really big films, they might get some sheet music to go with it, but most of the time, they did just play along with what was happening on the screen. How did they do those stunts? They were brave, and I've put a bit mad there. God knows what was going through their mind, but Buster Keaton did everything himself, and if you get a chance to watch some of his films, he really does launch himself all over the place. Can the camera move? Tiny camera movements were possible. They used to push the camera in a little bit or move it on a set of wheels really, really gently, because the amount of wobbling would really affect the audience while they were watching it. How long were these films? Buster Keaton's films were only 20 minutes long. They were 2 reels of films. A lot of them went up to 70, 80, 90, and in some cases, some really exceptional cases, they would go up to 2 hours plus. But for a reel of film, 10 minutes long, Buster Keaton managed to make all of his films at this particular point last 20 minutes. So what are the notes we need to make? We need to make a few more here, and they're really important. When the exam board has put across this sheet of information, they want you to have all of those pieces ready to be able to answer the questions on. So point number 2 in the margin, from 1895 to 1927, you've got the development of silent cinema. And if you want to pause the video right here so you can write down all of those details, you need to make sure you've got all of those foundations of filmmaking down, because they are all of the things that were invented or perfected, I should say, during the course of the silent era of cinema. Right, moving on, we're getting to point 3, and we're not going to get to watch a film with this particular point, because this is about the studio system, and this is about Hollywood. It's a place that we've all heard of. We might not know that it's an actual literal place. As part of Los Angeles, there is a suburb called Hollywood next to Beverly Hills, and it is where the American film factory began, really. The dominance of American cinema started in the 1920s with the emergence of the studio system. We're going to talk about vertical integration, the 8 studios, 5 major, 3 minor, which were sort of known as the Big 5 and Little 3. So let's start with vertical integration. What on earth does that mean? Vertical integration is the process of owning every part of the film business. That way they were able to control the money. What do I mean by that? Well, there were 3 parts to the film business. There was the production. That was the studio that made the film. So all of the studios you've heard of where they make the film, they write the script, they get all the actors together, they actually film it, they edit it, and then they get ready to send it off, which is where part 2 comes in, distribution. Now, in the old days, before the internet and digital filmmaking, you actually had to own a lot of vans. You had to own a lot of vans and load up film onto them and send it all around the country and eventually all around the world. So that was film distribution back then. And the companies that distributed would be owned by the studio. And finally, exhibition. That's where you and I come in when we go to the cinema and we watch a film. That's part of the exhibition, and that's where the final bit of money comes in. Now, if one company, let's say MGM, owns the studio, they own all the vans and the distribution company, and they own the MGM cinemas, that means that they make money off this film 3 times. They're able to charge and claim money from 3 different points of the film being made, which is a really clever way to make sure that you make all the money that you get from one film. So, who are the 5 major studios? You've probably heard of a few of these. These are the 5 studios during the 1920s that had complete vertical integration. That meant that they had production, distribution, and exhibition all sewn up. Who are they? MGM, you've probably seen them. They've got the lion. 20th Century Fox, they have the trumpets blaring. RKO are a studio that a lot of people seem to have forgotten about. Radio Keith Orpheum. They went out of business in the 1950s. They've popped up recently a couple of times. They've tried to bring them back, but it's not really worked. But RKO were a really big studio. Warner Brothers, we know them for making Batman films now and owning TV channels and stuff like that. And Paramount, they've got The Mountain and All the Stars. They make Mission Impossible films now. They used to be known for making thrillers. The 3 Miners, who are these guys? Right, these are 3 studios you will probably recognise, but they didn't have the complete vertical integration. They were missing either distribution or, in most cases, exhibition. So we've got Universal. You recognise them. They make Fast and Furious films now. Columbia, who have The Lady with the Torch, and United Artists, who went out of business around about 1981 when they were bought by MGM. So questions I get asked usually, are they all still vertically integrated? Well, the answer to that is no. And we're going to come to that in a future video because it's another point on the timeline. How many of the major minor studios exist now? That is difficult to say. It's always changing. I looked just before I recorded this and there are still 5 major studios. Unsurprisingly, Disney are one of them. But Disney just swallowed 20th Century Fox. So there used to be 6 recently and now there are 5. Some of them you might not recognise. Sony sort of took over Columbia, so Sony are a major studio now, and it's difficult. As for minor studios, that's changing by the year. What happened to RKO and United Artists? RKO went defunct, they went bankrupt in 1957, they were sort of mismanaged and run into the ground. United Artists released a really expensive film in 1981, and no one went to see it, so MGM bought them. Is MGM still a studio? And the reason I get asked that is because people don't see it very much anymore. It's not really a proper movie studio anymore. It's more of a distribution and rights company. You will see their logo pop up from time to time, especially on James Bond films, but not really a movie studio in the traditional sense anymore. So what are the notes that we need to make? And it's a little bit shorter than the last one. Point number 3, the 1920s, the birth of the Hollywood studio system. You've got vertically integrated studios, and you should put down production, distribution, and exhibition. And then you need to make a note of all the names of the big 5 and the little 3. Now, note there that MGM has got Lowe's written next to it because it went into partnership with a company called Lowe's. Eventually, it became known as MGM, and you've got all of the studios there as well. You can take a pause on the video just to make sure that you've got all of those notes down. When you've done that, though, close your book or put your notes away because we're going to have a little quiz. Right, let's get through to the quiz then. I've got 5 marks worth of questions, which is representative of what you would get in the exam. And I want you to write down answers for those 5 questions before I move on to the next one. So take a pause on the video right now, write down what you think are the answers, and then play the video when you are done. Here we are then, some answers. 1895 is the year that the Lumiere Brothers first projected a film for an audience. You can have any 2 from that list of things in question 2, which were the foundations of filmmaking established in the development of silent cinema. And for the last one, you have any one from the first list and any one from the second list. And hopefully, because you've listened to my excellent lesson here on YouTube, you will have managed to get 5 out of 5. And if you didn't, then, well, have another go, I suppose. We'll be back in the future, in the not too distant future, with another one of these, and we're going to try and cover all 10 points in about 3 videos. I'm Mr. W, and this is the Cinema Slice. Give it a like, a subscribe, all that sort of stuff, and we can make more of these videos to help people do even better at film studies.